Now, with 9 months to go until the Rugby Union World Cup in France, England are looking for a new head coach after Eddie Jones was sacked. Let's speak to the former England forward, James Haskell. James, very good morning to you. Just over 3 years since England played in a World Cup final. Have they gone backwards since then?
No, I don't think they have. I think the landscape of international rugby has changed. I think the margins of victory are so small now. You know, you obviously get some anomalies like Wales versus New Zealand recently, 55 points to something. Majority of games are won or lost by a few points, and that can come down to a malfunctioning set piece, you're scrumming your line out. It can come down to some clever individual brilliance or some individual error. That's how close it is. And I think personally it's utter madness. You have literally taken the most successful World Cup coach with a 90% winning record and binned him 9 months before a World Cup. He's been to 3 World Cup finals. He's won 1, lost 2, and he took Japan to some of the biggest upsets they've ever had. And then the best thing is the person they want to replace him with at this point in time, and obviously it's an ever movable feast, is not available. So you're going to put someone else in charge for the Six Nations who hasn't been an international coach just because of some grumpy old journalists and some miserable fans who've decided to gang up to get rid of him, which is pretty much the story of the modern world. If you shout loud enough and you've got enough fans in the media, you can achieve anything.
You just described it as madness there, James. And so how do you think that someone in the corridors of the RFU would justify this decision? If you were to ask them face to face, why have you done this? Why have you done it now? What would their answer be?
I don't know. I'm a very big fan of Bill Sweeney. I think he's a good man. I haven't had a chance to catch up with him. I was actually in Dubai DJing the last couple of days, so I haven't had that opportunity. But I think, unfortunately, it becomes a lot of times if you upset people and don't conform, and Eddie Jones doesn't conform, and does he get everything right? No. I don't think anybody gets everything right. And I think the margin for error in international sport comes down to inches, the very famous Al Pacino speech in Any Given Sunday. It's true. You look at some coaches who, from the jaws of catastrophe, have seized incredible careers. If one thing had gone the other way, they wouldn't have had the success. And unfortunately, I think that because Eddie didn't conform, didn't play play to the media's tune. There were some guys that just didn't want him in there. And I think, look, the Six Nations, it was disappointing. The Autumn Internationals was disappointing. But, not to the degree where there's such catastrophic errors. What some of these older heads are doing, and some of these older journalists who don't like Eddie, who don't actually come down and watch training. They don't speak to any of the current players. They're not particularly popular with current players because of their opinions, because they're there to sell newspapers. Then you've got ex-coaches who have agendas and vendettas who are able to use their media platform to put things out there. It's not based on fact. It's rhetoric. It's nonsense. You talk about the players not being confident. You talk about the players losing their shine. You talk about kind of players coming in and out of the squad. Eddie's there to put the best players on the field. And I had 5 international coaches with England, and they were some of the worst environments I've ever been part of. Eddie Jones was by far and away the best coach I ever worked with. He understood how to get the best out of the players, created a competitive environment, created a professional environment. And some of these journalists, when they recommend coaches to take over, and the people they're suggesting are not in the same league as Eddie Jones. And I find it funny. And as a sportsman, you can do Cristiano Ronaldo, you can do a Piers Morgan interview and blow the doors off it and name and shame everybody. Unfortunately, life's not like that, or certainly isn't for me, because I kind of want to keep working. So, and I'm not as good as Cristiano Ronaldo or got the cash. But I would say that ultimately people aren't honest, and I think people, especially in rugby, because it's run by a lot of old school people, they perpetuate these narratives that aren't correct. And to be honest with you, I think it's a shame. If the person taking over is Steve Borthwick, I think Steve Borthwick is utterly brilliant. If anybody to take over from Eddie Jones, I can't think of a better person. He's the number one person that I would have suggested. I didn't think in a million years they'd ever get him because of what a good job he's doing with Tigers. If they get Kevin Sinfield as well, then England are in a good place. And it's a nice transition because, I think nobody understands what it's like to perform at international rugby than Steve Borthwick, and what it takes to put a team together. Because I'd say Eddie's downfall and where things have gone wrong was consistency in coaches around him. I don't think he was surrounded with the right quality of coach. I don't think they delivered since Steve Borthwick, Paul Gustard, Neil Hatley, John Mitchell. There's another Australian guy that I've forgotten off the top of my head, which I apologise for. But those guys are brilliant. Unfortunately, as lost as to why you've done it. And I think it's down to pressure from fans, pressure from the media, and it became untenable. And how do you play? How do you get in that environment? How do you reconcile not firing someone when everybody wants his head, even though it's invalid?
There's a lot to pick up on there, James. I want to come to the crowd reaction first then, because they were booed off in that final autumn international, which they lost against the world champion South Africa. Is that a lack of understanding from the crowd? Is that a frustration with the style of play? Or is that just a desire for results over anything else? Like, you're not really cared about progress towards a World Cup. You just want to see your team win at Twickenham now? I
mean, look, I think firstly, the Twickenham crowd is not a great subsection of rugby fans. I think it's a very corporate crowd. I think they get upset if you play music too loud, you put too many fireworks up there, and their prawn sandwiches aren't cold enough and their Guinness is flat. I don't, they do. I've seen there. I've been there. It's not as intimidating as kind of the Principality. They're a bit fair weather, those Twickenham fans sometimes. They're amazing when they're on it. When they're off, it's a quiet place. It's not particularly intimidating. So I think they boo because they're frustrated. I think they boo because they don't understand necessarily the bigger picture. I think they boo because sports fans boo. Like, look at the Football World Cup now, and look at that as the example of the number one sport in the world. When has rationality, when has understanding, when has being informed ever come into sport? It's about emotion. It's about sort of an escapism from your real life. It's a tribalism. It's passion. It's madness. It's carnage. That's what being a sports fan is. So whether the fans boo or not, I think it's irrelevant. It's not part of the bigger picture. I just think, unfortunately, due to some selection things, due to some frustration, due to the nature of how flat the games were, and actually because the Twickenham atmosphere is pretty flat anyway, it just means it one leads into the other. It just becomes a bit of a flat landscape, and then people just get frustrated. I don't think it's a great example of people's actual opinion. And unfortunately, if you shout loud enough on social media, everyone thinks that that's the opinion. I think most fans are pretty pleased with what Eddie Jones has done. He's the most successful England coach ever, bar winning a World Cup. He's he won so many different records, the most successful World Cup coach. I can't understand it other than the tribalism, other than it's like a snowball rolling down a hill. It just picks up momentum. Everyone jumps on the bandwagon. They don't really know what they're looking at. So they just go, well, Eddie Jones is awful, let's fire him. It's way worse in football. Everyone gets fired every 5 minutes in football. So we're lucky our lucky stars at rugby is not quite like that. But at the moment, we're heading that way.
Just a final point then, James, and you touched on Steve Borthwick and said, yeah, he's the man for the job. He could do a great job as England head coach. 9 months till England step out onto the field for their first World Cup game against Argentina. Is that enough time for any replacement of Eddie Jones to fully get their message across and make England contenders to win the World Cup for a second time?
Yes, because the point is there's nothing wrong with this England side. There's not glaring errors. There isn't catastrophe behind every door. There isn't a lack of confidence. That there's some great players who haven't played particularly well. And I think if you ask the players, they take responsibility. Eddie Jones isn't out on the field. Eddie Jones would never coach a team to play badly. What kind of madness would that be? Why would he inhibit them? Why would he give them a game plan that didn't work? I mean, it's madness, unless he just wants to burn money and get fired, which of course he wouldn't do. It's insanity. And so the players just aren't playing well enough. I think Steve Borthwick will come in, having known that group of players, and will absolutely take them on. And I would say that this will just be a catalyst to make England better. I hope so. I just think the madness is, why would you get rid of Eddie Jones when you've got Six Nations? And it's, rule number one in life is never leave a job unless you've got another job to go to. Never move house unless you've got somewhere to live. Never fire a coach unless you've got the bloke you want in straight away. And they haven't done that. And that's the only thing I think is a bit cretinous about the whole situation. But I'm always backing England. I think they're brilliant. I think the players are brilliant. I think, Steve Borthwick will come in and kick them on. I don't think there's anything to be panicked about. This will be a storm in a teacup. Unfortunately, it's cost a good man his job, but we all move on. And you know what? Win or lose, it doesn't make any difference to any of us anyway. We all carry on with our lives. The sun still rises and sets and we're all good.
On that note, James, thank you very much indeed.